Here's Cliffe Connectley to insist that it's impossible to be agnostic.
Can I ask you a question? We've spoken about God inflicting suffering on animals. As it gets a bit complicated because, like you say, the genre of the text is important. There could be room for things like hyperbole, whatever. But the example that I gave in my opening, I said it was a direct question and it hasn't been answered, and that's due to the sake of time, of course. But I want to give you the opportunity now. That deer, leg trapped under a branch on its own. No moral free choice, no moral soul development, no people looking at this with a chance to save them, giving them an ability to achieve some higher order good, just starvation for, say, I don't know, a week before finally being stumbled upon by a mountain lion.
A common explanation for why a God which is allegedly all-powerful and perfectly loving would allow suffering is that it's because of what Adam and Eve did. They disobeyed God, and the consequence is that their disobedience brought suffering into the world. This doesn't explain, however, why it is that there were millions of years of animal suffering long before humans ever existed.
This kind of thing happens routinely throughout the animal kingdom. I said that if I gave you the opportunity right now, if I said that you were about to become a random wild animal somewhere in the world right now, when I press this button, I think you would kill yourself before I had the opportunity, because you know that you're about to enter a life of untold misery. The question is, why? Why is this allowed? And bear in mind that I don't know is not an answer.
Oh, yes, it is an answer. I don't know is called honesty, Alex. And if I don't know...
Well, there we have it then. I agree with you. I don't know is called honesty.
I'll give you my best
Agnosticism on this question is called honesty. We don't know. You don't know. I don't know.
Unfair, messed up world.
If Cliffe can say that he doesn't know why God allowed animals to suffer for millions of years before humans ever existed, then he is agnostic about why that is the case. That's what agnostic means. He insists, nonetheless, that agnosticism is unacceptable.
That deer is not born into the Garden of Eden. And because we are born into an unfair, messed up world, I've got a bigger concern than the deer. I've got the concern of my niece who died at the age of 7 in a horrible car wreck. I have a bigger concern, Alex. I have the concern of my nephew who was born with spina bifida. I have a bigger concern, Alex, and that's my younger sister who was born with brain damage and had to go through special ed.
What's your point? Humans suffer, therefore we shouldn't care about animals suffering? It sounds like that's the argument being made here.
We are all born, the deer, the human being, all of us are born into a cursed, unmet, unfair world. Not because God created it that way, but because we human beings told God to take a hike, and Lucifer told God to take a hike.
But animals have been living in a world full of suffering long before that happened, so how can that possibly be the explanation? Also, why would an all-powerful and perfectly loving God allow that to be a consequence of the actions of Adam and Eve?
And when God steps back, chaos erupts. Now, the real question is there a solution? And the amazing message of the gospel of Jesus Christ is God loves us so much that he provides the ultimate solution, forgiveness and eternal life in heaven, where there will be no more suffering, no more death.
How nice of him to offer a solution to the problem he neglected to prevent in the first place.
Now, what's your solution to the very real problem of animal suffering, of human suffering? And you guys, if you're going to be honest, you know you have no solution other than despair.
What's your point? The fact that atheism doesn't offer a solution to suffering doesn't at all mean that there is therefore a God. Also, even God, if he exists, doesn't completely solve the problem of suffering, because there will still be people suffering in hell forever.
Because poor suckers get born at the wrong time in the wrong place. It's just fate, destiny, and chance. And why don't you try and be honest about how you have to work through the despair and the meaninglessness of life in light of the fact that there is no God?
I wouldn't see life as being any more meaningful if there were a God, because there is no objective, non-circular reason why we ought to serve the purpose that God gave us.
Okay, so I think you've misunderstood. I just want to point out something. I think you've misunderstood the problem. The problem is one of internal inconsistency, right? Either you have to bite the bullet and say the suffering of innocence is okay, or you agree it's not okay, and then you have to explain how all this suffering is allowed. Now, to the question that Cliffe pointed out, and he said, well, humans told God to take a hike. Animals have been suffering for hundreds of millions of years before humans existed.
And even if they didn't, why do animals have to suffer because of what humans did? Why do any humans other than the two who disobeyed God have to suffer as a result? Why would a loving God allow that?
The other point that you need to take account of is that evolution, mass catastrophes like the KT event that wiped out the dinosaurs, these are the engines of how we got here. So if you're going to blame it on Lucifer, If you're going to blame it on him, that makes him the author of our creation, because had these events not happened, had evolution not worked the way it did, we wouldn't be here. So these are the engines of our creation. This is why so many theists, they say we accept evolution. That's how God used these are the means that God used to get to us. But these are incredibly violent means.
I don't know if Cliffe actually even believes in evolution.
So either you say Lucifer is responsible, but that means he's the author of our creation.
Everyone here seems to be assuming that Lucifer is the devil. He's not.
Or you have to say, well, no, it was Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, but that doesn't answer the question of hundreds of millions of years of animal suffering before.
None of this applies to animals.
Of course, in communication. I never said it was Lucifer's fault. I never said it was Adam and Eve's fault. I said there are consequences to created beings flipping God off and telling God to get lost. It's not the devil's fault. It's not Adam and Eve's fault.
If it's not their fault, then why is God allowing everyone to suffer as a consequence?
It is a consequence of created beings choosing to live their life separate from God. So I don't blame devil.
So which created beings are we talking about?
That is
which ones? Sorry. Which ones are we talking
about? What I said.
Which ones are we talking about, Cliff? Sorry. Which created beings? If it's not Lucifer, it's not Adam and Eve, who are we talking about?
Obviously, there are also demons who rebelled against God, the demonic.
So it's their fault.
Okay, but do all of the animals who suffer choose to live their lives separate from God? Do all the babies born with diseases choose to live their lives separate from God? Why does this allegedly all-powerful God not have the power to allow us to live separately from him without subjecting us to diseases and natural disasters?
Like Phil's question is specifically the suffering of non-human animals before Homo sapiens arrived on the scene. So say, 450,000 years ago, an animal suffering. Why? Who is it that rebelled that bring this about?
I do not know. What I do know is the consequence of free, autonomous individuals rebelling against God is chaos, unfairness, injustice fills the gap.
That comes later.
But why? Why did this all-powerful and perfectly loving God set the universe up in such a way that the disobedience of a few results in suffering for everyone?
Because that's when humans come on the scene. But we're talking about whether we would expect to find, before humans even arrive on the scene, let alone afterwards, billions of years of suffering and death and destruction with no human beings, no Adam and Eve, no even like moral agents to do this kind of stuff. Like the only options available are that somehow these animals are responsible for rebelling against God in some way, or there's some kind of pre-human existing demons or Lucifer, in which case you would be blaming it on them, or the answer is you simply don't know, in which case sounds again like a bit of an appeal to agnosticism.
I wouldn't say it's an appeal to agnosticism. I would say that it is agnosticism with respect to that specific issue.
That's baloney. That's not an appeal to agnosticism. It's instead a simple, humble statement that I really don't know. And for anybody,
that's what I said earlier.
Maybe Cliffe has a different idea of what agnosticism is.
They've got all the answers to all the difficult questions. Is the height of human arrogance. Now,
precisely.
Alex,
hold on. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
You have still not faced the impossibility of agnosticism when it comes to meaning and purpose in life, the value of a human life, ethics, and life after death.
Why is agnosticism impossible with respect to those things? Why can't you be agnostic about whether life has meaning or whether there's an afterlife?
And you intentionally evade it, and I don't blame you, Alex. I'd do the same thing if I was sitting in your chair. But you still are going to have to put your head on your pillow tonight, and you're going to have to acknowledge I'm a pretty highly motivated guy. I wouldn't have gotten the education at Oxford that I have. I wouldn't work as hard as I do at being rational and logical. You are living for something. You have confidence in someone, Alex.
Well, if enjoying what you do in life is meaning, then you don't need a God to exist in order to have that.
Now, come on. Just be honest with me and tell me where your confidence, your faith is.
But that does not answer. Hang on.
I have a few things to say.
Cliffe seems to think that you need to have faith in order to have any motivation to do anything at all. I don't see why I need faith to believe that I'm going to find what I do day to day enjoyable. I believe that I will enjoy it because that's consistent with my experience. Believing something because it's consistent with your experience isn't faith.
Hang on, Alex. Hang on. That doesn't answer the question, right? We asked you who was responsible. Then you said demons. And the problem that I faced, the problem that I brought up is going to be exactly the same. That makes then demons the authors of our creation, because as I said, We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the evolutionary process. Unless you want to deny evolution, I mean, feel free to do that if you wish. But then you're going to have more mountains of scientific evidence against you, right? So as long as you accept the scientific evidence, then these processes are how we got here. So whether you say it's Adam and Eve, whether you say it's the devil, whether you say it's demons, you're going to be faced with exactly the same problem, Cliffe.
False. You have not listened carefully to me. What I have said is God created free, autonomous individuals.
Is God himself not a free, autonomous individual? If he is, and he manages to never sin, then why couldn't he have created all individuals such that they are both free and never sin? If God is not free and autonomous, then freedom and autonomy can't be that great. If being without freedom and autonomy is good enough for God, shouldn't it be good enough for everyone?
To live in harmony, in love with him. When we rebel against him, there are consequences that we never imagined. Adam and Eve never imagined. Lucifer never imagined.
So what about all the suffering that occurred before we allegedly rebelled against him? Of what is that a consequence?
I never imagined. But before that,
I rebel against God.
Before that, animals were suffering.
There are amazing consequences that happen, and God created a good world, and when created beings rebelled against him, the consequences were horrific.
When did this good world exist? It didn't seem to exist prior to humans existing.
Do you know what redundancy is in design? Do you know what that phrase means?
No, I don't.
Okay, so redundancy means you plan for bad things happening. So one of my hobbies is skydiving. And if our main parachute doesn't work, guess what? We have a reserve parachute. I have a backup for my altimeter, an audible altimeter, in case that doesn't work.
Good.
Right?
I'm glad to hear that.
You build in redundancy into a system. My friend is a pilot. They have multiple backups in case things go wrong. Isn't it bad design for God to design a world that is so fragile that if a few creatures rebel, hundreds of millions, no, billions, probably trillions of animals are suffering? Isn't that bad design? Isn't that a lack of redundancy? No engineer would do that.
I would think that a perfect all-powerful designer would make a system sturdy enough that redundancy wouldn't even be necessary in the first place.
Also,
I'm beginning to... In order to love, we have to have a free will. If we have no free will, love is impossible.
How do you figure? Can you just snap your fingers and will yourself to love someone you don't already love, or stop loving someone you do love? I can't. Love doesn't seem to be free at all. And why would love be more legitimate if it were free? That would mean that it didn't have any predetermining cause. That is to say, love would happen for no reason. Why would love that happens for no reason be any more real or valid?
And when God creates us with a free will to love, he is obviously taking a limited risk. And the limited risk is that we will choose not to love, we will choose to hate and be apathetic. And there are horrible consequences to that.
But why? You are speaking about these consequences as though this allegedly all-powerful God does not have the power to give us free will without the risk of horrible consequences.
But the cross of Jesus Christ is a clear statement that God has provided the solution.
But why didn't he provide prevention?
God has provided the solution: forgiveness, reconciliation with him, with each other, and eternal life. And you guys are looking a gift horse in the face when you reject Christ.
That's not how that expression goes.
He's the best solution that there is to this horrible problem of animal suffering, human suffering, death of all of us. You're right. It's a real painful issue. Christ's death and resurrection is the most amazing solution to this problem. There's no better one.
And I love that you guys are taking animals so seriously. It's almost like you're appealing to this type of outrage again, but your desire to look at animals like they have souls.
We look at animals as though they have the capacity to suffer. I don't believe that you need a soul to suffer, but if you do, does that mean that you don't believe that animals have souls or the capacity to suffer?
I mean, what is a soul? What is a self? Human beings have this. The reason why we were created in God's image, and that type of worldview spread throughout the entire world. And now all of a sudden, slaves, kids, women, people of other ethnicities, all of a sudden had worth. That came from the biblical God, no other God. Definitely not atheism or anything of the sort. So I love that you guys are talking about animals and valuing them so much. But
I need to jump in here. I need to jump in here. Listen,
we don't know. Here in the U.S., just last point. Here in the U.S., 37% of people say that they would save the life of their dog before a stranger. Okay, that is pretty scary, and yet it's appealing to now. Okay. My animal has this incredible worth. Where is this word coming from? If they're just chemicals, if they're just a form of different fur and bones, why do I care so much?
More specifically, I empathize with animals because they have the capacity to suffer. Their biology produces that capacity. It's not a matter of them having worth, it's a matter of their suffering causes me suffering. It's because of my empathy for their suffering that I am motivated to prevent them from suffering. To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.